The Keturah, the wife of Abraham, is mentioned in the Bible in the book of Genesis. In Genesis 25 verses 1-4, it says that after Sarah, Abraham's first wife, passed away, Abraham took another wife named Keturah. The name Keturah is of Hebrew origin, and its meaning is often interpreted as incense or fragrance. In the context of the biblical narrative, names often carry symbolic significance, and Keturah could be seen as representing something precious or aromatic. According to Jewish tradition, she was a descendant of Noah's son, Japheth. Most people often ask or think that Keturah is Hagar, but Keturah and Hagar are different personalities in the Bible. Keturah was Abraham's second wife after Sarah. On the other hand, Hagar was Sarah's maidservant. When Sarah faced challenges conceiving a child, she suggested that Abraham have a child with Hagar. As a result, Ishmael was born to Abraham and Hagar. Later in the biblical account, Hagar and Ishmael faced challenges and were eventually blessed by God. Keturah is often mistaken as a concubine of Abraham. Keturah was not referred to as a concubine, and Hagar, although Hagar was referred as a concubine by some scholars, but according to the Bible, Keturah was married, and Hagar had a child with Abraham courtesy of her mistress Sarah. Most scholars argue that Abraham's decision to take Keturah as a wife was greatly influenced by God, but the Bible does not mention God instructing Abraham to marry Keturah. The decision to marry Keturah is presented without direct divine instruction. Therefore, Abraham took Keturah to wife out of his own will, which some scholars deduced could be because of the need for intimacy or companionship. The timeline in the Bible indicates that Isaac, who was the son of Abraham, married Rebekah before Abraham took Keturah as his wife. According to the Bible, the events unfold in the following order. Isaac and Rebekah's marriage is told in Genesis 24. After that, Abraham taking Keturah as his wife comes later in Genesis 25, after the death of Sarah. So, Isaac's marriage to Rebekah predates Abraham's marriage to Keturah in the biblical timeline. It is often argued among academics about the motivations behind Abraham marrying Keturah. It's not accurate to view Keturah as a backup plan, due to concerns about Isaac's potential barrenness. Abraham's decision to take Keturah as his wife is presented after Sarah's death, and the primary emphasis is on the continuation of Abraham's lineage. Abraham faced challenges with barrenness in the past, but Isaac was born as a result of God's promise to Abraham and Sarah. The Bible mentions that God fulfilled his promise by allowing Sarah to conceive and bear a son. This answers the question that lingers in the mind of people who say Abraham's action to remarry and bear children was an act of doubt or an avenue for God to choose out of his seeds to prolong his bloodline if Isaac battled barrenness longer than he did. Abraham's marriage to Keturah is often seen as part of the broader biblical story of patriarchs having multiple wives and bearing children through those marriages. The genealogy of Keturah, Abraham's wife, is outlined in Genesis chapter 25. According to the biblical account, Keturah bore 6 children to Abraham: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua, and her grandsons were Sheba, Dedan, Ephah, Epher, Enoch, Abida, Eldah. These descendants are linked to various Middle Eastern groups, forming a diverse ancestry. Historical and archaeological findings suggest that some of Keturah's descendants, like the Midianites, were involved in trade, especially in the areas of spices and perfumes. The region they inhabited was likely situated near the Arabian Peninsula. The narrative in Genesis 25 verse 6 states that Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines, including Keturah, and sent them away from his son Isaac while he was still alive, eastward to the east country. Genesis records that Abraham gave them gifts and sent them to the east, while making Isaac, son of Sarah, his primary heir. Keturah's sons were said to have represented the Arab tribes who lived south and east of Israel. According to the Judean authors Josephus and Malchus, the Punic people were descended from Epher, the grandson of Keturah. It is often debated among scholars Abraham's reasons for sending away the sons of his concubines, including Keturah, as it leads us to where the descendants of Keturah could possibly be. Separating the descendants of Keturah from Isaac's line might have been a practical measure to prevent future disputes or tensions. This action could have been a way to establish clear boundaries and reduced the likelihood of conflicts arising between the different branches of Abraham's family. In ancient times, the practice of having multiple wives or concubines was not uncommon, and it often led to complex family dynamics. In the case of Abraham, the biblical narrative presents him as a patriarch with significant influence, wealth, and a multitude of descendants. The primary biblical reference for Abraham sending away the sons of his concubines is found in Genesis 25 verse 6. But to the sons of his concubines Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still alive, he sent them away from his son Isaac, eastward to the east country. This verse indicates Abraham's proactive approach in dealing with the familial dynamics, perhaps to avoid conflicts among his descendants. Historically, some scholars suggest that Keturah's descendants might have settled in regions to the east of the land of Canaan, which is a confirmation of the Bible. The mention of Keturah's sons being sent eastward in Genesis chapter 25 verse 6 has led people to speculate about the potential regions where they might have settled. The East Country mentioned in the Bible is a broad term and could include areas beyond the Jordan River, parts of the Arabian Peninsula, or territories in the Mesopotamian region. Given the nomadic lifestyle common in ancient times, Keturah's descendants might have led a similar lifestyle to that of other nomadic groups in the region. Nomads often moved with their herds, seeking grazing lands and water sources. Let's take a look at the children of Keturah and their descendants. First is Midian. Midian is the most prominently mentioned son of Keturah in the Bible. His descendants, known as the Midianites, are referenced in different places. In Exodus chapter 2 verses 15 to 22, Moses encounters the daughters of the priest of Midian at a well. Later, in Numbers chapter 22 verse 25, the Midianites are associated with the events surrounding Balaam and the Israelites. The Midianites were likely nomadic people, engaged in activities such as herding and trading. They resided in the region east of the Gulf of Aqaba, which includes parts of modern-day Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and northwest Saudi Arabia. Many scholars agree on the fact that the land of Midian was a large territory in northern Arabia, which is on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba. In other words, it is the northern area of today's Saudi Arabia. Locations or trades of Keturah's other sons, Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Ishbak, and Shua, and their descendants are not as prominently mentioned as the Midianites, but we know they must have been close to each other, which make it difficult for us to distinguish. Historical records do not provide specific details about whether the descendants of Keturah's sons and Ishmael met. The biblical narrative mentions that Abraham sent away the sons of his concubines, including Keturah, to the east, and Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran. In Genesis chapter 21 verse 21, Sebeos, the Armenian bishop and historian describing the Arab conquest of his time, wrote that the Arabs assembled and came out from Paran. This could also conclude that Hagar, Ishmael, and his descendants are part of the Arab constituents. Therefore, it is possible that Ishmael and his descendants met his relatives, since the Midianites make up a part of the Arabian origin. In 1989, Professor Hasib Shahada, in his translation of the Samaritan Torah, suggested an identification of the wilderness of Paran with the desert of western Arabia, which is known today as the Hijaz. The descendants of Abraham's son Midian are collectively designated as Midian and Midianites. At times, the Bible seemingly refers to them as Ishmaelites. This may imply that the descendants of Abraham through his sons Ishmael and Midian were much alike in their way of life, and there may have been a further amalgamation through intermarriage among the two peoples. It also appears that at least some of the Kenites were known as Midianites. Since the Kenites were already mentioned as a people before Midian's birth, this may mean that Moses' Kenite brother-in-law Hobab was a Midianite merely from a geographic standpoint. Over time, it is quite likely that intermarriage between Ishmaelites and descendants of Abraham through Keturah occurred, resulting in the inhabitants of sections of Arabia. Since Ishmael and Midian were half-brothers, any intermarriage of their respective descendants with the amalgamation of their blood, habits, traits, and occupations could have given rise to an interchangeable usage of the terms Ishmaelites and Midianites, as is noted in the description of the caravan that sold Joseph into Egyptian slavery. In the days of Gideon, the hordes that invaded Israel were described as both Midianites and Ishmaelites. one of the identifying marks of the latter being their gold nose rings. A modern commentator on the Hebrew Bible has called Keturah the most ignored significant person in the Torah. Even though Keturah was a rather silent but important figure in the Bible, the level of her importance was shown through her descendants, and with all findings and results obtained from scriptures and books written by scholars, there is a rather wide range of possibilities that Ishmael's descendants and Keturah's descendants formed a community, thereby birthing the start of the Arabs. That's it for today. In case you have not subscribed to the channel, do so now, as we bring to you certain videos to prepare you for 2024. See you next time. Cheers.